C-Ship is an intensive entrepreneurial training program designed for professionals in the cultural and creative industries. It was designed by Ishak Brussels Management School in response to the current COVID-19 crisis under the framework of the United Nations International Year for the Creative Economy and Sustainable Development. This professional training actually is organized for both individual professionals, but also for organizations. And it specifically addresses 5 categories, which is cinema and audiovisual production, cultural institutions and museums, built heritage, adaptive reuse, performing arts, and design. We have 3 tailored professional trainings, one directed to individuals, and it's specifically about cultural entrepreneurship, while we have 2 other programs addressing organizations. One is about change agents training, and one is a challenge accelerator. I have the pleasure to present today Bonnie Burnham, who is the president of the Cultural Heritage Finance Alliance and president emerita of World Monuments Fund. She led the World Monument Fund from 1985 when she joined the organization as executive director. And through November 2015, during which time the World Monument Fund orchestrated and supported more than 600 heritage conservation projects around the world. In 2019, together with a group of colleagues, she founded the Cultural Heritage Finance Alliance, an organization that promotes financing strategies for heritage preservation in the context of sustainable development. Welcome, Bonnie, to our first webinar. And we are very pleased to hear from you about the creative community as a harbinger of urban generation.
Thank you very much, Ruba. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As Ruba has already said, I've been in the cultural heritage field for many years, working specifically within the context of the built environment. And I know that many people here are more from arts institutions and cultural institutions. And it's interesting that it seems to be sometimes a divide between those of us working with heritage from the viewpoint of buildings and urban spaces and those who are running institutions within those spaces. And I hope that this can kind of close some of those gaps in the course of this presentation. I'm starting with a little background, going back to 2015, which was a seminal year in this discussion about the role of cultural heritage in society and in relation to sustainable development. Because of the updating of the Sustainable Development Goals, which had initially been selected in 2000 at the time of the millennium. Many of us were on board at the time of the millennium with the hope of getting culture adopted as a 4th pillar of development. And that effort was not successful, but in the meantime, the heritage sector has done a huge amount of work to position culture and to think about its values, how culture is valued and the role that it plays in society. And I think that whole discussion is summarized in this image, which comes from the Cultural Heritage Counts for Europe report that was sponsored by the EU, in which many European institutions participated. We'd come to realize that culture is a driver of development, but sometimes it's seen as, from the economic perspective, an upstream driver, so that cultural events happen, cultural institutions exist, culture exists in our built environment context, and it creates these impacts that can be measured, economic and social and cultural impact, but it doesn't always benefit directly from those impacts or be seen as a participatory member of the development process. And so the idea of the Culture Counts program was to mainstream culture as an economic and development player. And I think that summarizes what we're all grappling with and trying to achieve today. And when the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015, again, a certain amount of dismay from people in the cultural sector that there wasn't one single goal associated with our mission. But on the other hand, culture permeates many of the sustainable development initiatives and objectives over time. And maybe we're better off that we're embracing so many different sectors of human development, sustainable development, as they are articulated through these goals. This image summarizes an approach to integrating culture with sustainable development that's been adopted by a program called Patrimonio Vivo, or Living Heritage, at the Inter-American Development Bank. And I happen to be working with them on a report. And I'm giving you a little bit of a anticipation of what's the main thrust of this initiative. Today, the report will be delivered in about 2 weeks' time to the Inter-American Development Bank, and then we'll see how they take it from there. But they've identified 5 pillars of sustainable development, which align with many of the goals that we're trying to achieve in order to stabilize environmental circumstances in our cities, and particularly the evolution of culture as part of this change toward integrated planning for the future of the planet. So what my new organization, CHIFA, was asked to do by the Inter-American Development Bank was to develop a methodology that could be applied to cities across the region in order to help bring them into, help bring not only culture into the mix of sustainable development, but to create linkages between the public and the private sector. Big institutions across the world tend to be involved only with the public sector and with properties, and with public sector partners, and with properties largely that are in the public domain and for public use, leaving a huge amount of the heritage designated sites, designated districts, and areas where culture plays a big role in urban life without any resources. So our goal is to create a methodology for integration between public and private engagement with sustainable development, which is catalyzed by institutions like the Inter-American Development Bank or the European Union, but without the explicit intention of engaging the private sector. And we came up with a 4-point methodology beginning, which is a kind of standard planning and implementation methodology, but focused explicitly on an overlay for urban development plans that brings the private sector into the same sphere as the public sector in terms of developing a vision and strategy, applying that to the entire framework of our planning area, creating a financial model for integration between public and private sector, and a management structure that can orchestrate those things. And that's more or less summarized in this slide, that all this anticipating the moment of implementation of any projects in order to bring public and private into alignment. And this captures the idea of expanding on the funding pool that's available not only for urban regeneration, but for the financing of cultural projects, which typically limit themselves or define themselves in terms of resources that are available from the public sector and resources that are available from the philanthropic sector. And so looking at these other forms of investment and forms of capital has typically been outside the mandate of nonprofit institutions that have been, you could say, siloed, or you could say focused on working within a milieu that's a very comfortable milieu for all of us, but rarely interacts with profit-making financial sector. And so these layers of financing, which are often referred to in financial sectors as a capital stack, I have characterized as a pool. And I think that the critical element to focus on here is the venture capital pool and the kind of yellowish orange band that it brings some capital into the marketplace in order to position cultural projects so that they would then align with other forms of financing, such as impact investment capital and even senior investment, which means people in the marketplace looking for a market level return. And so that's the crux of the financial argument in this thesis. I think the other critical piece is an innovative management structure for this orchestration of the relationship between the public and the private sector. Many cultural institutions are used to raising money. They're used to raising money through fairly orthodox, established vehicles like writing grants, grant proposals, and relying on certain kinds of public sector subsidies. But there is, as you begin to enter into a wider financial and capital environment, there are many other forms of outreach, of compliance, of investor expectations to be met, of risk mitigation that become part of the process of management. And I suspect that most institutions are not really in a position of readiness to take on this management role. And it may be that there's a solution, and I think there's not a solution that's really been invented. There are a range of management structures, from public-private partnerships to public management agencies to nonprofit management agencies that have been brought into existence in recent times in order to manage integrated financing projects. But each one is made to suit the local environment. And it may be that a single model emerges. But I think in general, in order to achieve market, to reach a marketplace that's broader than the one that our sector has had access to in the past, institutions may need to pool their projects and work together toward a unified goal. And I'll give you an example of that shortly. But I think that the bridging resource might be a revolving fund comparable to the kinds of revolving funds that exist in many, many places, particularly in the UK, where the Architectural Heritage Fund has had a long record of financing the startup of new cultural institutions and trusts that then take responsibility for heritage properties, or the famous one in Netherlands that provides seed fundings. And so this is a circular framework that ultimately provides the startup resources that allows institutions to develop the planning and early stage project work that will allow them to bring their projects to a broader marketplace. So I want to make two concrete examples where I think that the cultural sector is reaching beyond the traditional resources that it had in order to become players in this sustainable development marketplace that is being created as we speak. One that took place in New York just a year or two ago. There is a very well-known social service institution in the United States called LISC, L-I-S-C, which is a specialist in providing short-term financing, the same kind of catalytic startup financing that I just referred to for sustainable housing. Across the United States, there are many, many branches of it. But LISC has within its mandate the mission goal of placemaking. And so in New York City, they decided to enter in partnership with another organization into the creation of an inclusive creative economy fund, which had initially as its objective the financing of 4 projects that were the projects of different cultural institutions in the city. The one that you're looking at on the cover of this report from LISC, is an annex that was created by an experimental theater company called La Mama, that wanted to, in order to expand upon its audience base, engage in educational activities for children and in being able to attract a more inclusive audience. And so they acquired and renovated a new facility in order to do that. The financing, capital financing for it, came from a pool of investors through LISC. And so this, for the first time in my immediate environment, is an example of a cultural institution reaching out to the financial marketplace and with the expectation that over time, the new activity that will be generated in this facility will pay back the investors. And the other projects in that pool were very diverse, including a facility for artists' working spaces, for craftsmen, and so forth. But in the interest of time, I want to move on to my last example, which is something in the making, which is a cultural facility as a hub and as a catalyst for urban regeneration in the Zanzibar stone town in Africa. Zanzibar is the whole stone town is a designated World Heritage Site. It's in a condition of enormous decay and disinvestment. And so as a harbinger for new development, the title of the theme of my talk, an organization that's institute called Staatsverstel Amsterdam, the famous cultural property management institution, has been created in Zanzibar. And this project is to renovate a movie theater as the home of several cultural institutions, including a film festival organization, a music festival organization, a women's workspace organization, and itself. And they're looking to the marketplace, the traditional financial marketplace, rather than the philanthropic and governmental sources of support. They've been given the building by the Zanzibar government, and so they're just at the crux of beginning this process of creating something that can be both that can be a hybrid, both for-profit and non-profit, that can host organizations that are serving in the community interests, that can be the showplace for cultural activities and festivals, and then as an economic generating activity, and when all these other things are not happening, show movies in order to sustain itself. So I'm going to end my talk there, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk to this business-oriented institution. I look forward to the other presentations.
To our next speaker, who is Paola Borrione from the Fondazione Santagata for the Economy of Culture. Paola is head of research at Fondazione Santagata, which she chairs since 2018. She's PhD in cultural studies from the University of Siena, and she deals with the economy of contemporary culture and cultural production, particularly in connection with new technologies, an area in which she gained extensive experience at corporate level. She has conducted research projects, strategic consultancies, and training, gaining extensive experience at national and international level. Paola, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ruba, for your presentation, and thank you all for the invitation to this seminar. It was very interesting to hear Bonnie, and I take a lot of notes because there are many concepts that are really precious for our work. As Ruba said, Fondazione Santagata working in research, education, and consultancy in heritage management and cultural contemporary production. So coming from this field and this experience, we decide with Marta Field, that is a researcher in Fondazione, to work on the entrepreneurship in cultural and artistic field, and I will share the reflection we wrote on the book Innovation and Culture, Startup Entrepreneurship for Art and Cultural Tourism, that unfortunately is only in Italian because we recognize a gap on cultural entrepreneurship in Italy that is not like that in Europe. There are many books and texts to work with at the European level. There were less knowledge in Italy. So we identify 3 pillars when you have to set up a cultural enterprise, and that we can identify as knowledge of the market, the ability to organize a valuable team, and also to setting up the resource acquisition, as Bonnie said before. The knowledge of the market is a very intense activity to carry out in the cultural sector in particular, because we have to try not to rely upon our preferences, our fruition of cultural services and goods, but to try to collect data, even if it is a very time-consuming and costly process, but it's necessary to ground our business idea on real data. And for the cultural and creative sector, as well as for tourism, there are a lot of many secondary data sources if we cannot collect our primary data, starting with those collected and disseminated by national statistical bodies or also banks, and by Eurostat for Europe, or also other important international bodies like UNESCO or UNCTAD or UN, WTO, and OECD for tourism, which provide data every year at the international level, both on the demand side and on the offer side, so on the supply side, on the size of the cultural infrastructure of a territory or the services that are offered there, etc. Sometimes this data could have some limitation in terms of details or comparability, but if you search, you will find a lot of observatory at the national or regional level that can give you some deeper knowledge of your market. And beyond official statistics, there are a lot of data that are also given in an open format on the internet that could be used also to gain knowledge and information about cultural resources on one side and the habits, the fruition of the potential audience on the other side. So this first pillar, knowledge. The second one is the importance of the team. That is a topic that is central importance for the success of a cultural startup, because it is the most important level of the organization that could make an idea successful, thanks to the competencies and to the experience they have in previous experiences, and they also the ability to read trends or observe cultural, economic, and social transformation would be necessary in a cultural startup. I think more than in other sectors, because you have to act best before that trends becomes trends. You have to intervene with your business idea at the very beginning of cultural consumption trends to be successful. And in addition to that, it is also necessary to decide which are the functions you think that your team must have in the inside, which function could be buy on the market to be function to the development, but not central maybe to it. So you can buy on the market, also to develop only the heart of your team and not all the function at the same time. Last point is the resource acquisition and development, but I think that Bonnie spoke a lot and in a very deep way about it. So I will just give you some thought on a sort of checklist that we think that could be useful to develop a plan to be coherent and to be successful with your business idea. And this schema of question is also based on the European tool, the EIC, a European Innovation Center, that found the entrepreneurial idea under the Horizon program, not intended for the university, but intended for the enterprises. So it is, in our opinion, interesting to know what are the main questions you have to answer when you try to be found at the European level as an enterprise. First question, why should people be willing to use your product or your service? Or why stakeholder should finance it or support it through their network? Because sometimes you will have product or services that are in the market, and sometimes they are out of the market, but interesting for stakeholder because there are cultural or social impact. It is, in short, necessary to specify whether there is a substantial demand, if there are consumer or a stakeholder that would pay to have that product or that service, and how large is this demand, and what is also their spending capacity, because this gives you really strong and clear solid picture, or if your idea could be also a good business idea or not, or maybe it's not, the timing is not the right one. You may have to work some more time on it because because the market is not ready, for example. Then, is innovation feasible with the resources you have? both from an economic point of view, but also from a technical, reputational, communication and network point of view, because these are all elements that we can identify as capital resources for the entrepreneur. And which is the state of the market I intend to enter, and what are the future development prospects? Because it's important to know what are the conditions of the market in which I will develop my idea. Is it mature or saturated with supply or similar product? Is a new market that does not exist, and I will shape this market with my idea, or does this market have a high growth rates, or is very different from country to country? So I have to focus on one country best before going to another one. So let's have a good knowledge of the state of the market you want to enter in. And on the same side, what are my competitors? What are the proposals, their characteristics that differentiate my proposal? And I have to know them by heart, in depth, identify their strengths, first of all. Also their weaknesses, but their strengths are more important, because I have to work on that on my side to be as strong as they are. Their market share, are they going to grow or not? Maybe my main competitor work only on big market or big size market, like the if we have a look on the European market, on big national market as Italian, French, German or Spain one, and a Spanish one, but maybe they don't focus on the eastern part of Europe or in the Mediterranean side, and that could be my space of work. And then last two questions: how am I planning the transition from the idea to the product? So I have really to identify all the steps to take from the idea to the production, but also all the risks associated with those steps, all the critical aspects, and on the solution to those critical aspects I can imagine. And is my staff competent and motivated? Because that will be really an additional resources to all the one I have, to manage in the best way the staff that in the cultural sector is for sure the main element and key component of a startup.
Thank you very much, Paola, actually, for these very refreshing insights about how to launch an entrepreneurial cultural startup. And it's indeed very important to focus about the knowledge, and data collection is one of the very important aspects, the team composition and how it works, and indeed the resources acquisition. Johanna Suo is actually going to speak about very consistent aspects of the role of the creative sector professionals and how they can work with the business sector.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Rupa, to talk about this very important topic. So, a first thing I would like to address is actually the importance to clarify innovation and what you mean with innovation. This is such a widely used word, and I think it will always be done and seen differently depending on what sector and what context you are in. And for me, this context today, it's about how we can provide new ideas and ways of thinking and doing in the cultural and creative sectors to make the sectors empowered and more sustainable. And something that I'm actually always advocating for when it comes to the role of artists and designers in corporate innovation or skills transfer from culture and creative sectors to business, industry, and corporate environments is the diversity of thought it brings. And this is equally just as important here for us in the other way around. How does the business and corporate mindset and ways of doing and thinking help innovation in culture and creative sectors? So my way into this topic is not only for the concern for the culture and creative sectors, but it's also for the greater economy. And therefore, I'm wondering how can we, in a more connected way, work together and look for solutions. So we could also call this cross-sector collaboration and innovation. Look then from this wider perspective and not only from a culture and creative sector perspective. So necessity is said to be the mother of invention, but I think that also the skills that stem from the professions having the creative process in common, invention also stems from there. There has been during COVID-19 a lot of talk and action about rescue packages for culture and creative sectors. And that is, of course, rightfully as well. However, I believe that rescue packages cannot and will not push the sectors forward, and it will not develop them, and it will not adapt them to new times. And just a comment before continuing, I will say that I am a culture professional and entrepreneur myself. I have felt the challenges, the additional challenges that COVID brought to culture and creative sectors. So I'm not saying what I'm saying because I'm disconnected from the reality of independent and cultural professionals from the impact that COVID did have. I'm saying it because I simply do believe that rescue packages are not a sustainable approach. It's a very small part of a solution. So we cannot focus on sustaining something that already did not work. Culture and creative sectors presented so many uncertain living conditions before COVID, and it has just become devastating due to COVID now for some. Could you change the slide, please? So we have to search for solutions and create policies for challenging conditions that we already met earlier. So let's face then some points. Culture is a little prioritized and undervalued sector compared to most other sectors. Thus, it's also the case that it's challenging to have a clear legislation around culture and then also act around this. Because acting on the topic is about how and if culture is mentioned and defined in strategy and policy documents. The echo chamber of culture is another big challenge. Sectors need to dialogue and co-create and find solutions with other sectors. Then maybe some would say that it's controversial to speak about the many people working in the culture and creative sectors and the many people wanting to be in them. All the students that want to go to different artistic training programs. But it is a question of offer and demand, and many people, majority of artists and designers, try to sustain themselves in parallel on jobs in other sectors that often are underpaid and undervalorized because their direct skills, their talent and their competencies is not enough to actually feed them or to fit. They cannot fit enough into a specific context, and it's simply too many people working in the sectors. There's too much competition. And this links then as well to well-being. Everyone needs to feel useful in some way, to feel that one's skills, talents, and competencies are useful for others or for something. And this must create a huge frustration. And then there is a clear lack of entrepreneurial skills and digital skills. And of course, all education and training programs should definitely provide these. One question is if public authorities should engage further and deeper to secure social security and minimum revenues for independent cultural creative professionals, and to what extent. And this as well will be a tough one. This is a hard debate. There is a strong opposition to this question, to responding yes to this question. Change slide, please. So what can be the solution to all of this? I think that the intrinsic value of culture actually has a limited possibility to win fervent advocates and win allies from other sectors or from the other side. However, the instrumental and economic values of culture have more potential of winning battles for culture and in the valorization process. And I do believe that a two-way interaction is really needed with other sectors. And for this introspection within the culture and creative sectors is really, really important. Business model innovation within the culture and creative sectors can be done through rethinking, understanding, and recognizing the skills of the sectors. And that is, of course, a process where not only culture creative professionals have a role to play, but it has to be done in close collaboration and reflection with other sectors. And for example, in the culture and creative sectors, particularly art and design professions, have the creative process in common. So these professions generate skills that are of key importance in the times we're living in today. And I am sure that most designers and artists, they are not aware of that because, well, if they don't have the drive naturally to look far beyond their disciplines and see and think about how their skills and competencies could fit into other contexts. So in the knowledge economy, in the innovation economy, in the fourth industrial revolution that we hear about all the time today, you also hear about the skills as abstract reasoning, complex problem solving, systems thinking, collaboration, the ability to experiment, empathy, creativity, and this is creative. This is about the creative process mindset. These are all of key values to our times, and we could also talk about soft skills, human skills, 21st century skills, and life skills. So when we look in this, perspective, we have another standpoint for the offer and the demand question, one that naturally is dynamic and where there should be a flow. And then we could boost this kind of skill transfers in various ways through providing awareness and tools for this in all education, artistic education and training, creating career-long learning programs, creating and developing existing business hubs that should be empowered with this practice and that have knowledge staff from both sectors, and facilitation and building of ecosystems with also clusters of professionals and companies from the culture and creative sectors and from business industry and other sectors is very important. And of course, we need to create policies and instruments that support these kinds of actions. So I'm a founding partner of Artisans of Innovation, and we are an innovation partnership consultancy that work exactly on this cross-sector collaboration and innovation. And we are currently completing applied research on artists and designers' role in corporate innovation. And we do that then, of course, also from a cross-sector perspective team. In this context, I work with a corporate innovation specialist and a digital sector leadership specialist. And we are debating our knowledge and experience with one another. We have interviewed professionals, both from culture and creative sectors and from business sectors, having an overview of cross-sector collaboration and what it means, what it implies, what are the challenges and the strengths. And we're also doing a certain literature review. And from my perspective, the challenge with this practice today is that, creativity and innovation are priorities for business and industry. However, their belief system is misaligned with the belief system of the culture and creative sectors. Then we're talking about values, ways of seeing and doing things. And this is, for me, the key reason why an effective and valuable skill transfer in this practice does not yet happen properly. And I think that culture brokers can and will play a very important role in the future. And this is definitely also a practice that should be highlighted more for culture managers. Change slide, please. So just finishing up with some words on how I see, that we can contribute on what I have been talking about. So we will work with ISHIC and C-SHIP on a certain mentorship for C-SHIP participants that is very tangible, and I hope that will be helpful. And Artisans of Innovation, we will soon publish a white paper on our applied research. And we will also run some webinars later on this winter. And we are planning as well building a global partnership for this kind of practice, taking our conclusions to a practical level. And I'm sure that many of you have heard about the EU, on an EU level, what's happening now, what is called towards a large-scale skills partnership for the culture and creative industries ecosystem. I think that can be very helpful for this context. But of course, that is also focusing a lot of intra culture and creative industries. But there will, and I hope will be, more important parts that will be about external action as well. Because I've seen that there was a working group roundtable held with conclusions running up to the launch of this initiative. And they also mentioned cross-sectoral and wider skills, digital skills, artists and designers working with tech industry and creative talents teaming up with mastering technical skills to ensure human-centric design. So thank you, Ruba, from my side.
Thank you very much, actually, Johanna.